They thought it would be an easy kill, one target, 2 guns, no escape. But the man they came for had already planned their failure, and what happened next nearly started a war inside the mob itself. New York City, 1952. Rain fell hard against the sidewalks, turning the streets into shining rivers of light. Neon signs buzzed above storefronts, flickering red and green across wet pavement. Taxi tires splashed through puddles as people hurried along, heads lowered against the cold wind. But behind the noise of the city, another world moved quietly, one made of secrets, power, and fear. Inside a private room, at the back of a quiet Italian restaurant, thick curtains blocked out the streetlights. The air smelled of cigars and strong coffee. A single lamp above the table cast shadows across the faces of the men sitting there. They were not ordinary businessmen. They were men whose decisions changed lives, and ended them. At the head of the table sat Frank Costello, known across the city as the Prime Minister of the underworld. He was calm, neat, and always controlled. His dark suit fit perfectly, and his silver cufflinks caught the soft light. Costello didn't shout. He didn't threaten loudly like other mob bosses. He didn't need to. His silence was often more dangerous than words. Around the table sat several trusted men. Some handled money. Others handled violence. None of them spoke unless spoken to. A heavy rain tapped against the window behind them. Costello slowly lit a cigarette. He inhaled deeply, then released a thin stream of smoke into the air. Finally, he spoke. "Harlem is changing," he said in a steady voice. No one interrupted. Everyone listened. "There's a man up there," Costello continued, "who thinks he can make his own rules." The room felt colder. Everyone knew who he meant. Bumpy Johnson. The name carried weight across New York. Bumpy wasn't just another street criminal. He ran Harlem with careful intelligence. He controlled numbers games, clubs, and protection businesses. More importantly, he had the loyalty of the people in Harlem. That made him powerful and dangerous. Costello tapped the table once with his finger. "He stopped answering my calls," Costello said quietly. "Stopped sending reports." One of the men shifted slightly in his chair. "That means he thinks he doesn't need us anymore." Another man muttered. Costello didn't react to the comment. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a thick envelope. The sound of paper sliding onto the table seemed louder than it should have been. He pushed the envelope forward. Across from him sat 2 men known only as Rico and Sal. They were professional hitmen. Quiet, efficient, feared. Neither of them had families. Neither kept close friends. Their only loyalty was to the man who paid them. And Costello paid them well. Sal picked up the envelope slowly. Inside was a photograph. Bumpy Johnson stood outside a cafe on Lenox Avenue. He looked relaxed, almost casual, as if he had nothing to fear. His hands rested in his coat pockets. No weapon visible. No guards nearby. Rico leaned closer to study the image. "He alone?" Rico asked. Costello nodded once. "Every Thursday morning," Costello replied. "Same street. Same time. Same cafe." Sal studied the photograph longer than necessary. "There's always guards somewhere," Sal said carefully. Costello smiled faintly. "Not this time." The room fell silent again. The meaning behind Costello's words was clear. Bumpy Johnson had become too confident, too independent, too bold. And in Costello's world, independence looked like betrayal. Sal placed the photograph back into the envelope. "You want a message?" he asked slowly, "or an ending?" Costello leaned back in his chair. For several seconds, he said nothing. Only the rain filled the silence. Then Costello spoke 2 words that changed everything. "An ending." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Rico nodded once. No hesitation, no questions. Orders were orders. Costello leaned forward again and pointed at the photograph. "He walks this road tomorrow," he said. "No mistakes." The Sal slipped the envelope inside his coat. "It'll be done," he replied. The meeting ended soon after. Chairs scraped against the floor as men stood quietly and left one by one. No one joked. No one spoke loudly. They understood what had just happened. A death order had been signed. Outside, Rico and Sal stepped into the cold rain. Water soaked into their coats as they walked toward a black sedan parked along the curb. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Rico broke the silence. "You ever hear stories about this Bumpy guy?" he asked. Sal nodded once. "Yeah," he replied. "What kind?" Rico asked. Sal paused before answering. "The kind where people who try to kill him don't always finish the job." Rico let out a short laugh. "Everybody bleeds," he said confidently. Sal didn't laugh. Instead, he stared out through the rain-covered windshield as the car engine started. Across the city, miles away in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson sat alone at a small table inside a dim cafe. A cup of coffee rested in front of him, untouched. His eyes studied a folded piece of paper lying beside the cup. A message short, simple, deadly. Costello had ordered a hit. Bumpy didn't panic, didn't rush, didn't run. Instead, he leaned back slowly in his chair and smiled faintly, because he already had a plan. And tomorrow morning he intended to walk the same street, at the same time, exactly as always. Morning arrived slowly over Harlem. The sky was gray, and the streets were still wet from the night's heavy rain. Store owners lifted metal shutters with loud rattling sounds. Vendors rolled carts into place, preparing coffee, roasted peanuts, and fresh newspapers. The neighborhood moved like it always did, busy, loud, and full of life. But beneath the normal noise, something felt different. There was tension in the air. People whispered quietly as they walked past each other. Some glanced over their shoulders more than usual. Rumors had spread through Harlem overnight, traveling faster than the morning light. Frank Costello had sent killers, and their target was Bumpy Johnson. Inside a small barber shop on 135th Street, the smell of hair oil and shaving cream filled the room. The buzzing sound of electric clippers echoed against the walls. A radio played soft jazz in the background, but no one paid attention to the music. All eyes were on the man sitting calmly in the barber's chair, Bumpy Johnson. He looked relaxed, almost peaceful, as the barber trimmed the sides of his hair. His posture was straight, his face calm, but his sharp eyes studied everything through the mirror. The door, the window, the movement outside. Nothing escaped his attention. "Same as always, Mr. Johnson?" the barber asked quietly. His voice shook slightly. Bumpy gave a small nod. "Same as always," he replied. The barber swallowed nervously and continued working. Sweat formed along his forehead, even though the room wasn't warm. Everyone in Harlem respected Bumpy. Many feared him. But today fear had taken on a new shape. Today the danger wasn't coming from Harlem. It was coming from downtown, from men who didn't care about neighborhoods, families, or loyalty. Across the room, two customers pretended to read newspapers. But their eyes kept drifting toward Bumpy. One of them folded his paper slowly. "You heard what they're saying," the man whispered to his friend. His friend nodded. "They say Costello sent 2 hitters." He whispered back. Bumpy didn't react, not even a blink. If he heard them, and he did, he gave no sign. Minutes later, the barber finished and brushed loose hairs from Bumpy's shoulders. "All done," he said softly. Bumpy stood, adjusted his coat, and placed cash on the counter. "Keep the change," he said calmly. The barber nodded quickly, unable to speak. Just as Bumpy turned toward the door, it swung open suddenly. A tall man rushed inside, breathing heavily. It was Marcus, one of Bumpy's most trusted associates. His face looked pale. "You gotta come with me," Marcus said urgently. Bumpy stopped. Slowly, he turned to face him. "What's wrong?" Bumpy asked. Marcus glanced around the shop before speaking again. "They're here," Marcus whispered. "Costello's men. 2 of them. Seen near Lenox this morning." The barber froze. The customers stopped pretending to read. The room felt smaller. But Bumpy remained calm. Instead of reacting with panic, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Marcus stared at it. "What's that?" he asked. Bumpy unfolded it slowly. "It's confirmation," Bumpy replied. Marcus frowned. "Confirmation of what?" A Bumpy looked him directly in the eye. "That they're coming," he said quietly. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "You already knew?" Marcus asked. Bumpy nodded once. "I knew last night." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Then why are you still here?" he demanded. "You should be gone already. We got places you can hide, safe houses outside the city." Bumpy shook his head slowly. "No," he said. Marcus stared at him as if he had just heard something impossible. "No," Marcus repeated. Bumpy stepped closer to him, lowering his voice. "They want fear," Bumpy said calmly. "They expect me to run, hide, disappear." Marcus nodded quickly. "Exactly. That's how you stay alive." But Bumpy gave a small, knowing smile. "Fear only works when people see you running," he said. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You don't understand," Marcus said urgently. "These ain't street punks. These are professionals. They don't miss." Bumpy placed the folded paper back into his pocket. "Good," he replied calmly. Marcus blinked. "Good," he repeated. Bumpy nodded again. "Let them come," he said. The words felt heavy in the air. Even the barber stopped breathing for a moment. Marcus leaned closer. "You planning something?" he whispered. Bumpy didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the door and looked outside at the busy street. People moved normally. Cars passed. Nothing looked unusual, but danger was already there, hidden somewhere in the crowd. Finally, Bumpy spoke. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly, "I walk my usual route." Marcus froze. "You serious?" he asked. "Same time," Bumpy continued. "Same street." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "You can't do that," he said. "That's exactly where they'll be waiting." A Bumpy turned back toward him. "That's the point," he replied. Marcus stared at him, trying to understand. "You gonna carry protection at least?" Marcus asked. Bumpy reached into his coat and slowly opened it. Empty. No weapon. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "You walking out there unarmed?" Marcus whispered. Bumpy closed his coat calmly. "Yes." Marcus stepped back, shaking his head. "That ain't courage," he muttered. "That's suicide." But Bumpy looked at him carefully. "No," he said. "It's strategy." That evening, the streets of Harlem buzzed with whispers. Word spread from shop to shop, from barbers to bartenders, from musicians to taxi drivers. Bumpy Johnson would walk his usual route Thursday morning, unarmed. Some people called it bravery, others called it madness. But everyone agreed on one thing: Thursday morning would change everything. And somewhere in Harlem, hidden among the shadows of the city, two hitmen were already watching, waiting, preparing, for the moment they believed would be Bumpy Johnson's last. Thursday morning arrived under a heavy sky. Dark clouds hung low over Harlem, blocking most of the sunlight. The air felt thick, as if the city itself was holding its breath. A cold wind moved through the streets, pushing old newspapers along the sidewalks. By 9:30 a.m., Lenox Avenue was already alive with movement. Vendors shouted prices, delivery trucks rattled past, children hurried to school. Jazz music floated faintly from a nearby apartment window. To an outsider, it looked like an ordinary day. But the people who lived there knew better. Something was coming. Inside a parked black sedan 2 blocks away, Rico and Sal sat silently. The car engine was off. The windows were slightly fogged from their breathing. Both men watched the street carefully, their eyes moving slowly from face to face. Sal checked his watch. 9:41 a.m. For minutes, he muttered. Rico leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "You still think he shows?" Rico asked. Sal didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached inside his coat and touched the cold metal of his revolver. It sat hidden in a shoulder holster, ready to be used. "He shows," Sal finally said. "Guys like him, they think reputation makes them bulletproof." Rico gave a short nod. "Yeah," he replied. "But bullets don't care about reputation." Outside the car, Harlem continued moving. But tension spread quietly among the people who knew what day it was. From windows above the street, faces peeked through curtains. Inside shops, customers lingered longer than usual, pretending to browse while watching the sidewalk. Even the street vendors spoke more softly. They were waiting. At exactly 9:45 a.m., a figure appeared at the far end of Lenox Avenue. A tall man in a dark coat, walking alone, steady, unhurried. It was Bumpy Johnson. Rico spotted him first. "That's him," he said quietly. Sal leaned forward and looked through the windshield. Bumpy walked with calm confidence, hands resting inside his coat pockets. His shoulders were relaxed. His face showed no fear. No bodyguards followed him. No cars waited nearby. Nothing, just him. Rico frowned. "That ain't normal," he muttered. Sal nodded slowly. "No backup," he whispered. "No lookout." The distance between them was still long, but shrinking with every step. Across the street, a fruit vendor pretended to stack oranges while secretly watching Bumpy approach. Inside a nearby barber shop, men stood frozen near the window. Every movement felt slower than usual. Every sound seemed louder. Inside the sedan, Rico exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's finish this." Sal nodded once. They opened the car doors quietly and stepped out into the cold air. The street noise swallowed the soft sound of their footsteps. They walked side by side, moving naturally, blending into the crowd. Neither rushed, neither hesitated. Professional, calm, deadly. Across the street, Bumpy continued walking forward. He didn't turn his head, didn't change direction, didn't speed up, just walked. But behind his calm face, his mind worked carefully. He noticed everything. A man standing too still. A car parked too long. Two strangers walking with purpose. He knew they were here. Still, he showed nothing. 25 feet separated them now. Rico slipped his right hand inside his coat. Sal did the same. 10 feet. 9. 8. Sal's fingers wrapped around the handle of his revolver. He kept it hidden inside his coat pocket, ready to fire through the fabric, if necessary. His heartbeat slowed. Not faster, slower. That was the mark of experience. 5 feet. 4. 3. Now. Sal began raising the gun inside his coat. Then suddenly, a loud police siren shattered the moment. The sound screamed through the street like thunder. Rico froze instantly. Sal stopped moving. Both men turned their heads. A police cruiser raced down Lenox Avenue, lights flashing red and blue. Too fast. Too sudden. Too perfect. "What the hell?" Rico whispered. The cruiser slowed as it approached, tires screeching slightly against wet pavement. Then it did something unexpected. It stopped directly between Bumpy Johnson and the two hitmen, right in the middle of their line of fire. The driver's door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out calmly, adjusting his hat. He didn't look confused. Didn't look rushed. He looked expected. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," the officer said casually. Bumpy nodded slightly. "Morning, officer," he replied calmly. Rico felt a cold wave move through his chest. Something wasn't right. Police didn't show up like this without reason. Sal's grip tightened around his hidden gun. "Coincidence?" Rico whispered. Sal shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured. "Not coincidence." Across the street, pedestrians slowed. Some stopped walking. Others pretended to look into shop windows. But everyone felt the shift. Something bigger was happening. The officer stood calmly beside his cruiser, chatting casually with Bumpy as if nothing unusual was happening. But his position blocked any clear shot, and shooting now would be suicide. Too many witnesses, too many eyes, too many risks. Rico stepped backward slightly. Sal followed. Neither spoke, but both understood the same terrifying truth. This had been planned. Not by them. By Bumpy Johnson. He hadn't walked unarmed because he was brave. He had walked unarmed because he knew they wouldn't be able to fire. Because he had turned the street itself into his shield. Across the street, Bumpy adjusted his coat calmly. He never once looked at the hitman. Not even a glance. But as he walked past the police cruiser, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Rico noticed it, and that smile unsettled him more than any weapon ever could. Slowly, quietly, Rico and Sal turned and walked away. Mission failed. No shots fired, no blood spilled. But failure carried consequences. Serious ones, because back downtown, Frank Costello was waiting. And men who failed him didn't usually get a second chance. Night fell heavily over downtown Manhattan. Rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting yellow streetlights like broken glass. Inside Costello's headquarters, a quiet building that looked ordinary from the outside, the mood was anything but calm. The air inside felt tight and dangerous. Men spoke in low voices. Cigarette smoke hung thick near the ceiling. No one laughed. No one relaxed. Everyone knew something had gone wrong. And in Frank Costello's world, failure was never taken lightly. Inside his private office, Costello sat behind a large wooden desk. A single lamp lit the room, casting long shadows across the walls. His expression remained calm, but his eyes told another story. Cold, sharp, calculating. Standing in front of him were Rico and Sal. Neither man moved. Neither man spoke. They stood like statues waiting for judgment. Costello tapped his cigarette into an ashtray. "You had him," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but dangerous. Sal swallowed before speaking. "Yes, boss," he said carefully. "And yet," Costello continued, "he's still walking around Harlem." Silence filled the room. Rico shifted slightly but kept his eyes forward. Sal cleared his throat. "Police showed up," he said. Costello's fingers stopped tapping. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair. "Police," he repeated. The word sounded heavier than expected. Sal nodded. "Yes, boss. Cruiser pulled right between us and the target." Costello narrowed his eyes. "Random patrol?" he asked. Rico shook his head slowly. "No, boss," Reaper said. "Too clean. Too perfect." Costello leaned forward again. That was the moment his anger turned into something colder. Suspicion. Because police didn't just appear in the middle of a planned hit without reason. Someone had talked. Someone inside his circle had leaked the plan. The thought spread through his mind like poison. "Leave," Costello said suddenly. Rico and Sal exchanged quick glances. "You still want us on standby?" Sal asked cautiously. Costello didn't answer directly. "Leave," he repeated. The message was clear. They turned and walked out quickly, closing the heavy door behind them. The moment they were gone, Costello pressed a button under his desk. Seconds later, the door opened again. 3 trusted men entered the room. These were not hitmen. These were investigators. Men who specialized in finding traitors. "We got a problem," Costello said quietly. The men waited. "Someone warned Harlem police." Costello continued. "That means someone inside this house talks too much." The 3 men exchanged serious looks. "Find the rat," Costello ordered. That single command sent fear spreading through the organization. Within hours, the building turned into a place of suspicion and whispers. Phones were checked. Schedules reviewed. Alibis questioned. Men who had worked together for years suddenly distrusted one another. Late into the night, doors slammed open as investigators searched offices and files. Tension grew heavier with every passing minute. Finally, near dawn, a name surfaced. Vincent Marino. The discovery shocked everyone. Vincent wasn't just another soldier. He was one of Costello's closest advisors. A man trusted with private meetings, secret deals, and important decisions. He had been with Costello for over 10 years. Trusted, respected, loyal, or so everyone believed. Costello sat silently as the report was placed in front of him. Phone records match. One investigator explained. Anonymous call to Harlem police station. Came from Marino's office line. Costello read the papers slowly. No anger showed on his face, only stillness. "Bring him in," Costello said quietly. Minutes later, Vincent Marino was dragged into the office. His hands were tied behind his back. His suit looked wrinkled, but his face remained calm, almost confident. That made the room even colder. Costello stared at him for several long seconds. "You warned them," Costello said. Vincent didn't deny it. Instead, he gave a small smile. "Yes," he admitted. The room froze. Even the guards looked shocked. "You betrayed me," Costello said calmly. Vincent tilted his head slightly. "Not betrayal," Vincent replied. "Opportunity. Costello's eyes narrowed. Explain, he said. Vincent stepped forward as far as the guards allowed. You're losing control, Vincent said. Harlem slipping away. Other families watching, they see weakness. Costello listened silently. If Bumpy dies, Vincent continued, Harlem burns. Violence spreads. Police attention increases. Costello frowned slightly. And in chaos, Vincent finished, new leadership rises. The meaning became clear. Vincent didn't want Bumpy dead. He wanted war. A city full of chaos would weaken Costello. And in that weakness, Vincent planned to take power. You wanted my seat, Costello said quietly. Vincent didn't deny it. You're getting old, Vincent replied coldly. The city needs someone sharper. The insult hung in the air like poison. The guards shifted nervously. Costello stood slowly from his chair. The room became silent enough to hear breathing. He walked around the desk and stopped directly in front of Vincent. You built your future, Costello said calmly. Vincent smiled faintly. Yes. Costello nodded once. Too bad, he replied. You won't live to see it. He stepped back slightly. Then gave a small, simple nod to the guards. The sound of gunfire exploded inside the room. Vincent's body dropped to the floor instantly. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Final. Costello turned away without looking at the body. Clean this up, he said calmly. The guards obeyed quickly. But even as Vincent's body was removed, Costello knew something important had changed. The damage was already done. The failed hit had weakened his reputation. And somewhere in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson was still walking freely. Alive. Untouched. And now, the entire city was watching to see what would happen next. Days passed after the failed hit. But the city did not forget. In Harlem, whispers moved from street corners to barber shops, from cafes to nightclubs. People spoke quietly, but the story spread quickly. Frank Costello had tried, and failed, to kill Bumpy Johnson. That alone was shocking. In the underworld, reputation was everything. Power wasn't just about money or guns. It was about fear, and when fear cracked even slightly, enemies noticed. Meanwhile, life in Harlem continued. Jazz music played from open windows. Children laughed on sidewalks. Vendors shouted prices to passing customers. And every morning, like clockwork, Bumpy Johnson walked the same streets. Same coat, same calm face, same steady steps. He acted as if nothing had happened, but inside he remained alert, careful, watching. Because surviving one attack didn't mean danger was over. One quiet afternoon, Bumpy sat at his usual table inside the Lenox Avenue cafe. A cup of black coffee rested in front of him, steam rising slowly into the air. The cafe buzzed softly with conversation. Spoons clinked against cups. A radio played low jazz near the counter. Everything seemed peaceful. Then suddenly, a black sedan rolled to a slow stop outside the cafe window. Bumpy noticed it immediately. His eyes shifted slightly, studying the car's polished surface and tinted windows. He didn't move, didn't panic. Instead, he calmly lifted his coffee cup and took a slow sip. The cafe door opened. A gust of cold air followed. Several customers turned their heads. A tall man stepped inside, well-dressed, confident, familiar. It was Frank Costello. The room fell silent. Even the radio seemed quieter. Costello walked slowly across the cafe floor. His polished shoes made soft tapping sounds against the tile. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Fear followed him like a shadow. He stopped directly in front of Bumpy's table. For a few seconds, neither man said anything. They simply stared at each other. Two powerful figures. Two enemies, separated by nothing but a small wooden table. Costello studied Bumpy carefully. You knew, Costello said finally. His voice was calm but carried weight. Bumpy placed his coffee cup back onto the table. Yes, he replied simply. Costello nodded slowly. You arranged the police, he continued. Bumpy didn't deny it. I arranged protection, he said calmly. Costello leaned slightly closer. You wanted me to shoot, he said. Make me look reckless. Bring police heat down on my whole operation. Bumpy allowed a faint smile to form. I wanted you to think, before pulling the trigger. he replied. The words hung in the air. Costello studied his face, searching for weakness, but he found none. No fear, no anger, just confidence. For several seconds, silence filled the cafe. Then, unexpectedly, Costello let out a short laugh. Not loud, not wild, just one quick sound. You walked unarmed into a death trap, he said. Most men would run. Bumpy leaned back slightly in his chair. They count on running, he replied calmly. Costello crossed his arms. You got nerve, he admitted. Bumpy shook his head slightly. No, he corrected. I got planning. The two men locked eyes again. Outside the cafe, people slowed as they passed the window, pretending not to stare. Inside, customers remained frozen in place, barely breathing. Costello's expression softened. Not with kindness, but with respect. You changed the game, Costello said quietly. Bumpy said nothing. Costello glanced around the cafe, then leaned closer to the table. You understand something, he continued. This city runs on power, but power ain't always guns. Bumpy nodded once. Sometimes, he said quietly, power is patience. Costello smiled faintly. For the first time, there was no threat in his face. Only calculation. Then he straightened his coat. We're done here, Costello said. Bumpy raised an eyebrow slightly. Don't? He asked. Costello nodded. For now. Those two words carried meaning. Not peace. Not friendship. Just distance. Costello turned and walked toward the door. Each step echoed through the silent cafe. As he reached the entrance, he paused briefly. Without turning back, he spoke one last sentence. You earned your walk, he said. Then he pushed the door open and stepped outside. The black sedan waited at the curb. Moments later, it disappeared down Lenox Avenue. Inside the cafe, silence remained for several seconds. Then slowly, the sounds returned. Spoons clinked again. Voices whispered. Life resumed. Bumpy Johnson remained seated at the table. Alive, unarmed, unbroken. He picked up his coffee and finished the last sip. Outside, Harlem continued moving like always. But the story of that week would live on for years. Not because of violence. Not because of bloodshed. But because of something far more powerful. Control. In the end, Bumpy Johnson had done something rare in the underworld. He had faced death without firing a single shot. He had stood in front of killers without fear. And he had forced one of the most powerful mob bosses in the city to step back. The streets of Harlem remembered that lesson. Because sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a gun. It is a calm man who refuses to be afraid.